first question for you, easy question. Why did you choose The Power of the River as the title for your book?
Thank you, I've always lived around water, and it's been a source of just dreaming for me. I've always, as a kid, used to do my most reflective thinking by the ocean, and now I live in the Northwest, around rivers, the Yakima River, the Columbia River, the Snoqualmie River. So rivers have meaning for me. But I come from a community where the river has meaning as well. If you listen to gospel songs, we will gather at the river. There's always songs about rivers. My mother used to play the piano in church, so I'd always hear songs about rivers and about waters, deep river kinds of things. So, and in much of my teaching, I used to often teach about the importance of water and the importance of river, the symbolism of rivers. They can reflect us, they can nourish us, these waters can baptize us, they can divide us or they can bring us together. They can be places where stories haunt us, the Tallahatchie River, when Emmett Till's mother exhumes his body from the bottom of the river that tell us a story about justice and about fairness and about brutality. But they can be places that can be nourishing as well. And so I just think about the power of the river often. And I think of myself as having moved upstream over the years and been gently guided by people who have guided me up the river. So the river, for me, and the community I come from, is always kind of a powerful metaphor.
Wow, I love that sentiment. And I also love that connection that you made to music when you were talking about that, which kind of brings me to another question that I have. The musical greats of your childhood were looked upon as people who were creating so much space for Black people to express their creativity and joy, especially at that time. So now you, in writing your book, I'd say that you're kind of part of that group that's expanding the space for Black artists. What are the Black artists of this generation that you admire or that inspire you?
There are a number of them, and some of them are close to me family-wise. There's a young woman named Yomalis Rosario, who's a Brooklyn poet. She's a wonderful poet. And there's a young man named Adrian Brandon who lives in Brooklyn also, who's a poet who grew up here, and he's like family to me. So those are young artists and young poets that really inspire me. So I listen to poetry, and visual artists for me are oftentimes inspire me. And of course I go old school. I go back to Luther Vandross from time to time. He's not a contemporary artist, but it was funny because the first opening that we did for Book Talk was in the Northwest African American Museum, and it turned out, it was actually quite moving for me. When I walked in, I saw a picture of Luther Vandross. I saw the clothes of Luther Vandross.
The whole exhibit.
The whole
so
exhibit.
Cool.
It just blew me away that NAM would do that, and that it would bring me so much in touch with my own history and artists that my mother loved. Did you know that Luther originally started as a Sesame Street singer?
I did not know that.
Let's do some homework on this,
Wow.
because I think he was originally, his early starts, he was a backup singer, and I think he was singing with Sesame Street. When a documentary comes out, take a look, because
I will.
It's got ties to Sesame Street.
Are there any contemporary musicians that you've been into at all lately?
Not as many contemporary musicians, so mostly I gotta stay old school a little bit, which is unfortunate.
Stick to what you know and you
Stick to
love.
what
I
you
can't
know.
blame you
A
there.
couple of my favorites, Rudy Francisco is a wonderful poet. Do you know his work at all?
I don't.
He's fabulous. And then Amanda Gorman, who is just so fabulous. So I draw from them as well from time to time. But no musical artists. I have to start listening to more music.
Yeah, well, there's so many great.
Name someone. Who do you listen to?
Well, honestly, this is gonna sound a little bit contradictory, but I love Beyonce, and I mean, I guess she's still pretty contemporary in the sense that she's releasing music, but I love just going back to her old albums, and just listening to that. And I'm also really into like a lot of the newer R&B singers that are out, like Kehlani or Giveon or SZA. Those people, love them. Kind of on a similar vein, as music and artists, you mentioned in your book that you choose to stay home from church and watch Fat Albert. I really love that section. And you mentioned a lot of other things that you used to watch in your youth. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how media can often be sort of a source of comfort during patches of our lives, whether we kind of realize that or not, what we choose to watch. What forms of media have brought you comfort in your adult life or recently, specifically books that you might have read that inspired you while you were writing your own?
I read a lot while I was trying to write. I always read. Bell Hooks I keep close to me. She's just was always such a beautiful writer. But there are some things that I taught from books that I use. Toni Morrison. She wrote a book called The Bluest Eye that I used in my own teaching. And The Bluest Eye was a hard and powerful book to read and to teach from. But one of the things she did, she wrote an afterword years later after that book, and it was successful in many regards. It sold a lot of books, and it was on Oprah's book club and all that kind of stuff. And she said that book failed. And the reason she said it failed was because it touched people, and she wanted to move people. And so that concept of the difference between touch and being moved, I remember just sort of staying close to Toni Morrison. Ernest J. Gaines, A Lesson Before Dying, ultimately about teaching, about learning, and about life. And so Ernest Gaines, I read. There's a colleague of mine, Sean Wong, who's a beautiful writer, and I've stayed close to Sean's works as well because he's just such a fabulous writer. So I had lots of books around me, just for inspiration, and really inspiration from writers who just really took their craft serious. Ta-Nehisi Coates is someone, and Coates is someone who inspires me because he talked about writing and writing and writing, and focusing on every word, making every word count. And he said in a painstaking kind of way, he chose his words with such care. So those were some of the writers that I knew were just such serious and thoughtful writers and inspiring writers that I just wanted to draw from their energy. And I'm nowhere near the kind of writer that works, but I wanted to do justice if I was going to publish something that would be called a book, that I wanted to draw from people that were kind of ancestors and people that inspired me. So I kept books very close to me.
Yeah, I love that. I also am really interested in what you said about touch versus impact. Was that something that stuck in your mind at all, putting out your first book? Like a fear or anxiety that it might not have the impact that you want it to have?
I talk about some things in this book that I hope will move people. And there's some things that I mentioned in the book. And mind you, I started the book as a set of stories that I was writing to a friend. So I was telling some things that were fairly intimate. And I talked some about experiencing or being the child of an alcoholic, the child of a father who's quite violent. When it comes to stories like that, I don't tell them just for the sake of telling them. I want them to be stories that would help move people, to be more compassionate and more caring, to be more present. Some of the stories I tell with the hopes that it will move people to tell their own stories, to ask their parents, for you to ask your parents, and ask our grandparents and great-grandparents if you have the opportunity to say, tell me your story. I got the loveliest note from a father and son who read the book and began a conversation with each other. And the father, I think, has written a book himself, and the son is asking questions of the father. Those are the things that I think are moving kind of activities, not just touching. I'd be happy if people read the book and said that was nice, but I'd be more inspired if people read the book and said, I'm gonna go talk to my parents, I'm gonna go talk to my mother, I'm gonna write a love letter to my mother, I'm gonna write a love letter to my parents, I'm gonna write, and I'm gonna tell my story, and I want that story to hold. So I want people to not be just touched, I want them to be moved.
I think they are, from what I've heard just over the last week at your book launch and people's response to it in general. I think you've got exactly what you're going for. Following on that sort of train of thought in terms of media that inspires you, location was something else that I was thinking about a lot with you and your book. Your family has background in Japan, you grew up in California, you live in Washington now. The whole concept of a river in general is very location based. Are there places that you've been that you feel have inspired you in terms of writing your book, or what habits or interests do you think you've picked up from the places that you've been throughout your life?
Places where I've been, I love living in the Pacific Northwest, I love living in Seattle. And that in and of itself inspires me. And I think in some ways the winters in Spokane, as dark and dreary as they can be, this is a lovely environment for staying at home and writing in the evening, because it's dark, you want to get warm, you can turn on the fireplace or light a fire and just sit and write. So in some ways, the Northwest is a place that inspires me. Going home, when I occasionally do, to Lompoc, where I grew up, inspires me to think about stories, memories that come back for me. And I did have a chance to go back, and the cover of the book is a picture of my mother and my sister in Japan. And I had a chance to go back, and it was really moving for me to stand in Tachikawa, Japan, many years later from the date of my birth, to stand there and think I was born here and I'm back in Japan again. So, and that inspired me to think about what memories I have. I was too young to have memories from there, but it was a really powerful thing to link up my experience with the photographs in my scrapbooks that are pictures of me being born in Spokane, in Japan. And my mother being there and looking really, really happy, and my sisters being there. I just mentioned Spokane almost inadvertently. My schooling, my time at Gonzaga University, I go back there all the time. And I go back to Spokane, and I'm just reminded of some really formative years that were there. Some formative years that were hard, but that place, and again, the river, I usually make my way to Riverfront Park and stand by the river, and I'm reminded of the number of hours I've spent studying by the river, walking by the river in Spokane. So going back to Spokane reminds me of my college years. And you'll get to come back to the University of Washington years back and go,
I'm already there. Whenever I come to campus, I'm just like, oh, I just miss this place.
They're
so
really
much.
reflective times, because powerful things happen there, places where you've learned. I go back to some of the classrooms that I sat in, and I go back to some of the benches I used to sit at in the dorms I used to live in, and they bring back just really powerful memories. And to the extent to which I can, I go find my former classmates and teammates. In an interesting and odd way, I've become closer friends with some of those classmates than I even was when I was in college over the years. So it's been a lovely thing.
Yeah. In terms of your young adulthood, though, what were some things that you wish that you had been told as a young man while you were growing up? And what do you kind of want young men to know today?
There's a man named John Kabat-Zinn who defines mindfulness, and he defines it this way. He says, pay attention, on purpose, non-judgmentally, as if your life depended on it. Those are the four things. So if I were to look back at my young self, I think I often paid attention. And I paid attention on purpose, but I was really judgmental of myself. Not of others, I was really critical of myself. And so I would tell the young person, I would tell myself as a young person to be less judgmental of yourself. So you might miss a jump shot, but that doesn't mean you can't shoot the ball. You might have failed your statistics exam, which I write about, but that doesn't mean you're dumb, right? So don't judge yourself. Just say, I failed that test, I'm gonna do better on the next one. I missed that shot, I'm gonna make the next one. But just the judgment can just be a weight that's hard to carry. So I would take John Kabat-Zinn's lesson, and I'd say, pay attention on purpose, but don't be judgmental, because the harm comes in, and I'd say this to young black men, just withhold the self-judgment. Because there are times when I just wondered whether I'm worthy. Those kinds of questions are too much of a weight to burden. So I would tell myself, be less judgmental, be less harsh about yourself, and embrace the community around you, and know that people care about you.
I think that's great advice, and I feel like with young men in my life, I've noticed that that seems like a pretty common issue that a lot of young men deal with, is just self-judgment, whether they feel like they're worthy or deserving. They really tend to carry that weight pretty heavily on their shoulders.
Pretty heavily, and it comes out in sometimes destructive ways and sometimes self-destructive ways. We have good and important lives, we are cared for, and we just have to remind ourselves to be non-judgmental, to be less harsh on ourselves.
Totally. I just have one last question for you. It's about your chapter, Junior Optimist.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the end of it, you say, looking back, I understand how small efforts to help teenage boys on their journeys mattered. Can you tell us what you mean by that, both as a former teenage boy and now as a scholar of education?
I visited South Africa for a number of years in a row, and I would spend time in South African schools, in township schools where the deepest poverty is. I remember driving in a car with a school principal named Lunga Diani. And I'm driving in a car with Lunga, he's driving, and he stops the car, bam, he stops it, and he jumps out of the car and he goes and talks to some young man who looks to be 11 or 12, and he's talking in a really animated way, and he points, and he gets back in the car and he drives, and he does it again, stops and talks to some young man. And I said, Lunga, what are you doing? Lunga was a school principal. He would find young men that were supposed to be in school that weren't in school, and he knew them by name. And he would say, I need you to be in school because I need you to be well, and I need you to graduate, and he took it personal. Because he knew that when these young men and young girls graduated from school, that they came back to their community, and they took what were shanties, and they built a home. So each year I'd come back, I'd see a home, and another home, and another home. It was just a brick home that meant somebody had stable living conditions. One of the things that we need to do in schools, as best we can, is see young people and want to stop if they aren't making their way. We want to stop and actually say, you matter, and you matter in your life, and we're going to stop, and I'm not going to move forward until I know that you're going to be okay. We need to wrap the school and school community around all of our kids, and we cannot afford to leave any behind because they're that important to the well-being of our community and democracy. But that sense of urgency in South Africa, they knew that you can't build a democracy in South Africa without every one of those kids that's on the street corner. They have to be in your school, and we have to love them, and we have to support them and educate them, because in the end, they'll build another little house and they'll be well, and then you move to the next. And you see these communities begin to develop, and you can see that the future of South Africa is going to be in students that are doing well in school, that have been cared for, that have been brought in and been hugged, and have been educated with some rigor. I talk about a particular teacher for me, Miss Jackson, who would stop in at our house and say, I see it's dark in your house. I know you don't have light. I know you don't have heat, but I need you to light a candle. I need you to do your homework. And she just simply embraced me at a point at which I'm on this border. Can I continue to do school? Am I going to stop school? And she was like, yeah, light a candle. I'm going to light the way for you. Keep moving forward. We can't afford to lose kids. We particularly can't afford to lose kids of color. We know that curricular relevance, curricular rigor is going to matter, and making sure that we embrace them and move them through and create schools that become communities of belonging. And those two things can happen. Academic rigor and a place of belonging can happen at the same time. We just have to design it that way.
Are there any other sort of specific things that education systems you think that they should be doing to help students thrive, specifically in, let's say, like a UW setting here today, right now?
A colleague of mine, Claude Steele, talks about challenge over remediation, that students need to be academically challenged, and they need to see that the work that they're doing is relevant. It helps to know our students. If students are struggling, it helps to design efforts around them to make sure that they're supported. When I talk to students that are, in many ways, I'm going to put in quotes, excellent students, the students that are kind of our top students at the university, they're getting awards and all that, I say, so what makes you so special? What makes you so much brighter than other students? I mean, and they'll stop me when I say brighter, because they'll say, I'm not brighter than anybody else. There was a young man who told me that early in his schooling, his parents and his community came around him, and school came around him and said, you're really good at school. We should make sure you're the valedictorian. We should make sure that you move and you continue to be the best in your class and continue to be really excellent at everything you do. And he said that happened all the way through my schooling, that people kept convincing me that I'm really capable until I got here, and then the same thing happened. Faculty surrounded me and said, you're really capable. What he described was almost like teachers as Taylor. They wrapped the curriculum around him, and they said, you're going to be successful. Imagine every kid. So he said, I'm not brighter than anybody else. Just people have surrounded me and just kept me moving upstream, or just kept me moving upstream. I think in a real practical way, especially students that are struggling the most, let's wrap the curriculum around them as if we're tailors, and make sure that they're moving to the next step, based on their ability and based on their capacity to move forward. Let's support them and put more resources into supporting those that need the most. So I think those are some of the things that we can do.
I think that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much.